So good evening, everyone. Welcome to our, excuse me, elementary student assignment policy, fall 2021, community engagement. Community engagement town hall. Give me 1 second while we refresh the deck. All right. Okay, I'm back. Thank you. So thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we're going to share our findings from the new elementary student assignment policy community engagement that occurred over the last 3 months during the fall. You'll also hear how your insights will inform the zone design process and ways to be a part of our future conversations. Next slide. So our journey tonight will consist of a little bit of background about the new elementary student assignment policy, some information about our various stakeholders and community members, and then we'll go into talking about an overview of all of the information that we collected, and then we'll end in a closing. Next slide, please. So just a little short Zoom school. Today, our chat is closed, but our Q&A is open. So that means feel free to access our Q&A. You see the blue arrow pointing down to those little text boxes. That's where you will be able to type your answers. We have staff available to answer your questions in Cantonese and also in Spanish. Next slide. Before I begin framing tonight's conversation, I'd like our interpreters to repeat their message, please.
Buenas tardes. Si necesita interpretación por medio de Google Meet, por favor marque el siguiente número telefónico seguido de la clave de acceso. 1-475-444-3421. Por favor digite la clave 233-415-619 seguido de la tecla numeral. Gracias. Cantonese interpreter, please. Thank you.
Okay. 再一次，我哋為今晚嘅會議提供呢個同步嘅傳譯服務。如果你需要中文傳譯，請撥打 Google Meet 嘅電話號碼，電話號碼係1-240-544-6335，代碼886-309-873井。多謝 ，Thank you.
Thank you. So tonight we're going to build a common understanding of why the student assignment policy is changing. We'll talk about the policy's goals of diversity, proximity, and predictability. And then we'll hear about the different ways that community members engage with the zone development process during the fall. We'll also show how the community feedback and input to support will go into supporting the building of draft zones. Next slide. We know that changing the current student assignment policy is going to be a big shift for our entire district. And tonight we have supporting this, this change and the redesign of zones, the team with us. I apologize, you guys. So I want to go ahead and give a shout out to my team members supporting this work around redesigning the elementary student assignment policy. And that's Joseph Menardo, our technical project manager, Jessica Koo, the transportation analyst, Archie Folkin, our executive director of transportation, myself, Marisha Robinson, the community engagement manager, Carissa Yee Finley, the director of school portfolio and planning, and Lauren Kohler, the executive director of the Educational Placement Center, and Susan Shuha Say, communications and marketing manager. And we also have Orla O'Keefe, who's the Chief of Policy and Operations, and Reed Levitt, our Management Assistant. So just a little bit of a background. Next slide, please. Board Resolution 5101.2. So this policy for a new elementary zone-based student assignment policy was approved in December of 2020. We're implementing a new assignment system because our current system is not working as intended. Schools are segregated by income and race and ethnicity, and the enrollment process is a bit complicated for families. It isn't really predictable or transparent enough, and not everyone has equitable access to the choice process as it exists now. Due to systemic barriers, and families traveling across the city also creates a barrier to strong community and school connections. A little bit about the policy goals. So there's some core values that help shape and develop this new policy. And some of those values are a commitment to ensuring that every student has access to quality schools, and knowing that students are best served in diverse learning environments. And student assignments should be easy for families and should be the start of positive relationships between the district and families. These values have informed our goals for the new student assignment policy. The new zone-based student assignment system will strive to achieve all of these goals. The goals of diversity, proximity, and predictability. Thank you. So right now, this is a timeline of the work that we're doing to redesign the elementary student assignment policy. And we're in the stage of implementation. We will review draft zones in the spring, and that will give us the time to actually look at the proposed zones. During this time, go back, please. Thank you. There'll be multiple opportunities for the community to give feedback on draft zones before we commit to them. And those will happen with community workshops, during the ad hoc committee on student assignment, during town halls like this one, the use of surveys, and small but intentional focus groups. As you can see in the timeline, that star right there means we're in the implement phase. So none of this is taking effect yet. The new policy will be implemented in the 24-25 school year. Our community, we will continue to strive to engage our community, and the next steps will be coming back to the community and giving feedback on the draft zones. Next slide. So it's a little bit about the policy itself and how it will work. So there's 3 elements to the new policy. There's zones, diversity categories, and tiebreakers. Zones determine how schools are grouped together within a boundary. And diversity categories and tiebreakers will influence how students are assigned to schools in their zone. Now, the new student assignment policy includes those 3 components: zones, diversity categories, and tiebreakers. And now we're going to go a little bit deeper into each of them. So what's a zone? A zone is a boundary, a geographical boundary that encloses elementary schools. It determines which schools families can apply for, and they are designed to promote diversity, and proximity, and predictability. Zones will ensure that every student has access to general education options, language pathways, and special education programs. Next slide. Diversity categories. Diversity categories are a way to ensure that each elementary school and its academic programs enrollment reflects the diversity of that zone. Now, diversity categories work within the zone, not across zone boundaries. And again, they'll help influence how students are assigned to the school of their choice within their zone. So SFUSD is designing these diversity categories using aggregate measures of neighborhood characteristics. And those measures are things like household income, race and ethnicity, and academic achievement that are attributed to all applicants who live in the same area. So what that means is diversity categories are not using individual students' characteristics. Instead, it's using the information about the applicant's neighborhood to make sure that students with different backgrounds and lived experiences are represented in each school. This is a way This is one of the many ways to help promote diverse and inclusive learning environments within schools. The tiebreakers. So tiebreakers are a way to assign students when more students request a particular school and program than there are seats available. So SFUSD currently uses tiebreakers, but the new system is going to simplify that list of tiebreakers to consider the following 3 factors. Siblings, so younger siblings of students who are currently enrolled in and will be attending the same school. There'll also be an equity tiebreaker. And those are students who either reside in federal public housing or in historical underserved areas of San Francisco, and a pre-K tiebreaker. And those are students who are enrolled in the district pre-kindergarten programs co-located at a district elementary school who are applying to TK or kindergarten at the same school. So we've talked a little bit about zones. We've talked about diversity categories and how students will be assigned to schools within their zones, and the different tiebreakers that we'll use if there's more requests for seats, if more students request seats than there are available in the school. This is a reminder right here of our zone development timeline. And again, remember that throughout this whole process, there's multiple ways and opportunities for the community to give input and feedback around the way the zones are designed. And we'll be able to share draft zones with the community upcoming in this spring. Who did we talk to during the fall? So we held lots and lots of workshops during the fall. Next slide. And part of this policy, community engagement, is written into this policy, and it says decisions about zones and diversity categories will be made in partnership with staff, our district advisory bodies, families, and the community. Specifically, representatives of the aforementioned stakeholders will be part of the team recommending zones and diversity categories to the superintendent. Now, the approach to developing zones and diversity categories will be active, conscious, and non-neutral process focused on the proactive counteraction of race inequities. So this policy was written intentionally and purposefully to include the community and its voices around designing the zones. And our commitment to the community throughout this whole process is that community engagement is genuine, it's inclusive, it's respectful, it's purposeful, it's informed, and it's transparent. Next slide. Who we heard from. So we heard from lots of different voices throughout the process in the fall. We held 17 different workshops over the course of 3 months or so. And this is a representation of the different community voices that we heard from. So we heard from some of our district staff through Lunch and Learns, through our ad hoc committees, and through our Parent Advisory Council on student assignment. We've heard through our families, right? Over 300 families participated in our virtual workshops, and we had one in person too. They were held in multiple languages as well. And over 400 families completed our survey. And our community. We couldn't have done this without our city and county and community partners as well, who helped to support hosting our workshops and informing the community about what was happening. Next slide. So right here is a few snapshots of all the different ways that we interact with folks and some numbers for you all to look at. So we know that the community that we interacted with, the respondents had various levels of household income, as you can see listed there, with 39% of our families falling within the, excuse me, I need to adjust my screen. Falling within that first bar right there. You'll see that we hosted and our families took surveys in 3 different languages, the main 3 languages, with English being 50% and 22% of our families using Cantonese and taking the survey in Spanish as well. What was really unique about our engagement in the fall is 90% of our survey respondents were SFUSD families or families with children ages 0 to 5, and those are the families that will be impacted the most by this new policy that will take place in the 24-25 school year. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk about some of the our findings and our key themes. So many may be wondering, if they didn't have an opportunity to participate this fall, what did we ask the community? What are the things that we needed to know to help us to inform the design of school zones? We wanted to know, did the community prefer that zones be similar to the city's overall demographic and their representative, or did we want to avoid over-concentration, meaning that no group is concentrated or isolated in any one zone? We also wanted to know from the community, did they prefer geographical larger zones with more schools on it and to choose from, or did they prefer smaller zones with fewer schools to choose from? What did our respondents say? So diversity, representativeness versus avoiding over-concentration. 59% of our overall survey respondents said that they prefer representativeness as a way to define diversity. Right, so that means that 59% of our families and community thought that they would like to see zones represented as something that's similar to the overall district demographic, the city's demographics when it comes to diversity. Right here in this slide, you can see the breakdown of our respondents based on income and race and which areas they preferred representativeness or avoiding isolation. The second thing that we went to the community and asked during the fall was about the size of our zones. Did they prefer larger zones with more schools, which would be maybe 10 to 12 schools, or did they prefer smaller zones with fewer schools, around 8 to 9 schools? So 55 of our survey respondents said that they preferred larger zones with more schools. And this slide here is a breakdown of race and income of our families and how they, what they preferred versus smaller or bigger zones. After having numerous conversations with folks, doing our community workshops and having other meetings, we had to pull together all of the data and information to come out with some key themes. Some of the key themes that were surfaced from the community is, when it comes to diversity, ensuring representatives is what makes sense to most families. But there were concerns about how that would happen, if it would be too strict, and whether students from underrepresented communities would feel isolated. Another theme is, families prioritize more choice over proximity, but there's value in both, and we know that. Families also want to ensure that there's an access to a range of language and special education programs for their child. And families, of course, want to hold the district accountable for providing equitable resources in schools and to invest in schools and to reduce disparities. And again, this new elementary student assignment policy is just one piece of that puzzle to accomplish all of these things. We also pulled out that our African-American families, Pacific Islander, and Latinx families, and families with students who are English language learners or receive education services from SFUSD want to ensure that their staffing at school sites are diverse and there is intentional inclusion and integration into schools. And so there may be many questions about how this new policy will work, but we know that many families, or we heard that many families value the policy's overall goals of diverse learning environments. We heard the community preferred representativeness, but there were worries about isolating small demographic groups. So what we're doing as a team is working with our research partners that are going to create zones that are both diverse and create affinity from students for all backgrounds. We also heard that families prioritize choice over proximity, but they value both. So working with our research partners again, we'll draft zones with 10, 11, or 12 schools, and we'll evaluate how these different options will achieve proximity and access to programs. Other ways that we're working with your feedback is we heard that families want access to a range of programs such as language and SPED programs. So we'll work with our SFUSD multilingual pathways and special education departments to ensure continued access to specialized programs in other zones. Again, a shift this big for the district requires everyone to be on board and everyone to work together to make it happen. Student assignment alone cannot just do that. We also heard that families want equitable investment in resources distributions across all schools. And so we're assessing how current schools and resources, along with the state accountability scores, compare across our zones and within different schools, and also how that we can provide equal access to funds and future investments. We also heard that families want diverse staffing and intentional integration at school sites. So we are highlighting and speaking with district leadership to reiterate the need for diverse staffing as we continue along with policy implementation. And we heard that the SF community values diversity, but it won't be easy. So we will continue to be in conversation, collaboration, and partnership about why diversity is important to SFUSD through thoughtful communication. So our continued commitments to the community. So accountability. Working across internal departments to support zone diversity and inclusivity at school sites is one of the ways that we will hold ourselves accountable throughout this process. Transparency. We're going to provide ongoing opportunities for community engagement that will directly influence the design of zones and using consistent communication methods to share out our progress with the public. And we're also deeply committed to anti-racism, a commitment to design zones that will address racial inequities and bring SFUSD core values of equity and social justice to life. So at this time, we've come to almost the end of our presentation. So we're gonna close it out. I am going to check to see if there's anything outstanding questions in Q&A that we may want to answer out loud. I rely on my team.
Marisha, many of the questions in Q&A have been about whether siblings will be able to apply to their older siblings' school if it is not in the zone. Could you talk a little bit about the answer to that question?
Well, okay. Well, younger siblings or older siblings? I'm sorry, can you repeat it one more time?
Of course, will younger siblings be able to apply to their older sibling's school if the older sibling is attending a school outside the zone?
In elementary school, K-5. I don't have a direct answer for that right now. If someone else on the team would like to jump in and answer, that whole process we're still thinking through.
Can you share the question again, Lauren? Sorry, I want to make sure I heard it properly.
Of course. The question is, will younger siblings be able to apply to the school of an older sibling, even if the older sibling is attending school outside the zone?
Yes, they will. So the sibling priority will continue on throughout this new student assignment process. So regardless of where you live and which zone you're in, if you already have a child that's enrolled in a school and you want your two children to be able to go to school together, they will get that sibling tiebreaker and be able to apply to a school outside their zone.
Marisha, another question is, when does the school zone draft become available? Can you talk about the next phase of community engagement?
So our next phase of community engagement will begin in late April and early May. And that's where we'll be previewing and showing the community draft zones where they can give us feedback and input to refine them so that they can be finalized. There'll be community workshops, maybe some in person, depending on how things are going. It would be nice to see folks, but there'll also be plenty of them available virtually. You can always stay updated through our weekly email list and also by checking our student assignment website on SFUSD.
Great. And then there are a lot of questions also about language programs. Are you guys able to share any information or when information will be available about how language programs will be distributed through the zones and how that system will work?
I'm happy to provide a little context and response to that. So we're currently working closely with the multilingual department and with the special education department to consider the current distribution of language pathways and how that impacts and can be incorporated into the development of zones. I think we recognize completely that creating zones is just one aspect of many things that the district needs to do in order to ensure that we can meet all of our, that every child has access to kind of educational experience that that their families are desiring for them. And so we will, it's part of the process is considering as we're drawing these zones, where are language pathways based? But even if we weren't drawing zones, the work about how our access to language is distributed throughout the city, that work needs to be done regardless. And it's work that's happening in tandem as we're working to draft the zones. I realize that that might not be crisp and clear enough, and that is because it's still a work in process. So I think the simplest thing to say is that we're working closely together across departments to make sure that we're taking a coherent approach to multiple shifts that are going to be happening across the organization.
Great. A question about how many zones in total will there be in San Francisco?
So right now we don't have an idea of how many zones there will be, but there's 72 elementary school choices to choose from. And we are looking at dividing kind of large zones. So you could kind of do some guessing or estimating. But when we present draft zones, there will be a variety of options that will have we'll have different amounts of zones, and you'll be able to see what the impact is, what the diversity categories are to that, and how that would look for your community or neighborhood.
Thanks, Marisha. And I'll just add that right now we're focusing on maps that generate 6 zones, 7 zones, and 8 zones. So just to give kind of a more concrete sense of what our team is considering and looking closely at right now.
And then a last group of questions that appeared pretty frequently in the Q&A was about how school resources are distributed and whether this student assignment plan has any impact on the unequal distribution of school resources.
Thank you for that. This, the new policy was designed and implemented to interrupt that inequitable distribution of school resources and to design a system where where schools can receive the resources that they need to provide a quality education for all students and families. So with this new change and new shift, you can expect that the way that schools are receiving their resources and funding may change as well. I'll allow anyone else on the team to expand if they like.
Yeah, I would just say that building on what Marisha's already said, we're anticipating a paradigm shift here, right? We know that changing student assignment alone is not going to create the kind of changes that our families have expressed and over a long period of time, not just around student assignment, but more broadly. And so as we work to change student assignment, we know that it's going to have a ripple effect across multiple aspects of the organization, and we see that as a positive thing. So we want to make sure that each and every child, regardless of where they live or regardless of where they go to school, has an excellent opportunity for the highest quality education that the family is desiring. And so as we think about creating the zones, if we just create zones, we're not going to solve any problems. If we create zones and reimagine the opportunities and experiences that are available to every family that lives in every zone, that's actually what's going to create the shift that we believe families have been asking the district for a while. So student assignment is one aspect of many things that need to shift. And so we know that quality schools are of paramount concern to families. We've heard that consistently over time. We recognize that access to resources and a variety of other things is what's top of mind for families. So we see this as a framework for creating change. We want to draw the zones and have them finished by June of this year, so that we have between June of 2020 and the fall of 2024 to make the kinds of shifts that need to occur in addition to changing student assignment. We also recognize that it's going to be a huge paradigm shift, especially moving away from a full choice system. While this has surfaced up many challenges and inequities for our families, moving from choice to a more constrained choice is going to be a paradigm shift as well. That's why we want to have many conversations and get lots of input throughout this process, because ultimately we're designing this so that it works for our families and so that we can be responsive to what we've heard over time. So we welcome all the input and all the questions we're receiving. We're hopeful there'll be town halls before this is over too, because just speaking personally, I'd much rather be in the room with everybody so I could see everybody and hear questions. So we appreciate you taking time to come out into this virtual context, and we hope it's helpful. But welcome all your feedback.
Are there any more questions to surface?
I think in the Q&A has been really rich in the format, in the written format. So I think one of the things we'll also do after this is some of the questions we've been able to answer, some of them we've partially answered, some of them we've said, that's a good question. We don't have the answer to that yet. So we will capture all of that and turn it into an FAQ document that we can send out via newsletter. If you haven't already signed up for a newsletter, that's a way that we can keep sharing information with you as well. And sorry if I jumped ahead, Marisha, you were probably going to say something about that.
It's okay. Thank you for that. Alrighty, so I'm gonna bring our meeting to a close now. Next slide, please. I'd really like to share some deep appreciations, and the team as well is grateful to all the staff and the volunteers and parent leaders and community partners who made the fall 2021 engagement activities possible and will continue this journey with us into the spring. To the current and future SFUSD families, and to all the other members of our community, thank you for your participation, for your questions, and your feedback and input. You play a vital role in making this project succeed. Next slide, please. So our next steps. So we're using community feedback to inform draft zones that will be presented to this public during the spring. So that's late April, early May. Be on the lookout for ways to give input on those draft zones. But throughout that time, we just won't disappear. We're going to stay engaged and active with the community, maybe hosting small focus groups, ensuring that you're receiving updates through our email newsletter and keeping our website up to date, as well as hosting our ad hoc as well as participating in our ad hoc committee meetings where the public is able to give public comment and also do some deeper diving into all the various pieces that are moving in alignment with this policy. Next slide. So ways to stay involved. So I've been mentioning this this newsletter that we send every 2 weeks, and the way that you can sign up for that is you can go to sfusd.edu/student assignment. It's one word, and you can browse around there and also sign up for our newsletter. You can find updates there. You'll see schedules of different meetings that we'll have as well on the website. All right, and that brings me to the end of our meeting or our town hall. I thank you all for your interest in this work and for the community's valuable insights and input into the work. And I look forward to continuing our conversation and working in partnership. Thank you all and have a good night.